Okay, so welcome to the first part in the first series on Unreal Engine 4 master material creation, and this is the Master Materials for Beginner series, and it's divided into 5 parts. In this first part, we're going to discuss some basic new project and scene setup. If you feel comfortable with your knowledge on that, you can go ahead and skip to part 2, where we'll go ahead and start talking about the base color. In this part, we're going to talk about how to set up a new first-person project using the in-engine default for first-person blueprint system. And this way we can drop in and walk around if we'd like to. We're also going to talk about how to set up a extremely basic lighting environment for material testing. That will just include a few basic things like light mass important volumes, sphere reflection captures to get some decent reflections happening, a directional light for the skylight, and an actual skylight. We'll discuss throughout the videos some basic navigations and hotkeys for the editor, as well as how to save files. We'll do a basic lighting bake. Again, nothing complex, just enough to be able to preview our material for now. We'll create some folders inside the content browser for clean and easy navigation within the engine. We'll go ahead and create our blank basic material, so if you skip forward, make sure that you know you have to go ahead and create a blank material to be working within. Nothing special there. And then we'll also talk about how to apply materials and material instances using material elements within the engine. So without further ado, let's go ahead and move forward to part 1. Okay, so in this first video, we're going to talk a little bit about setting up a new scene with some blueprints for moving around and just kind of putting some props on the level so that we can see what we're doing as we're updating and iterating on our material. And this is going to be a fairly quick process. So let's go ahead and start here with a new project. So I've launched the material, the material out of the Unreal Project browser, and I'm under New Project. And what we want to do is scroll down a little bit, and actually, it's actually right here at the top, Blueprint First Person. I'm just going to left click that, and we're just going to call this Material Tutorials. And we'll come down here, I'm going to say, and we do want to check mark this include starter content, because this is going to come in really handy when we're just kind of testing textures and so on and so forth. So let's create project. Okay, and so that brings up the example map, which comes with every project when you start it up, and you can see right here first person template. And what that means is we have a player start point, and basically we can just drop down and we have a first person template available for us to walk around and just kind of quickly preview our scene, which is nice. But what we want to do is we want to go up here to file and say new level, and we just want to pick the default level, and that gives us a nice clean kind of empty scene with the basic static mesh here, and we have some basic components set up. So we have a light source, which is a directional light, which is kind of acting as the sun right now. And we have some atmospheric fog in the scene as well. And then we have that player start again. And then we, of course, have the sky sphere itself, which is giving us a nice backdrop. The static mesh template map floor is the actor that we have in the scene right now, and that's a great base to start with. First thing we want to do is we want to go ahead and create ourselves a new folder. So over here in the content browser, underneath the game folder right here, and this acts a lot like Windows Explorer, we're just going to either right click and say new folder, or we can hit the drop down menu up here and say new folder. I'm just going to right click, and we're going to call this material tutorial. Hit enter. You can call yours what you like, and that gives us a new empty folder to work with. And so let's go ahead and set up this scene the way we want it now that we have our folder in place. One of the first things I want to do is add another prop. So materials can be kind of hard to see the definition when they're on a flat surface. So let's go ahead and add something with a little bit more interesting characteristics so that we can see the effects of our material as we iterate on it a little bit better. So right here underneath the props folder, if you scroll down just a little bit, there's a static mesh, or rather SM underscore material preview mesh 02. I'm going to drag this into the scene by just left click, drag and drop. Alright, and the way I'm navigating is Alt left mouse button. So oftentimes I'm a big Maya user, so coming from there I will find my mesh in the scene, I'll hit F to frame up on it, and I'll use Alt right mouse click to zoom in and out, and Alt left to kind of pan around. Okay, so now that we have that in the scene, let's go ahead and create our new material. So over here in the content browser again, let's find our material tutorial folder. We want to create a new material. So again, we could go up here to new, we could hit material here, we could scroll down to the material and textures tab and hit material there, or we could just right click inside the folder and do the same thing. So material, and I'm just going to keep the traditional naming convention that they use, so it's capital M underscore, and I'm just going to call this material tutorial, and that creates a brand new blank material. Okay, and we can see that there's nothing happening with it because we haven't given it any instructions, but the first thing we want to do is go ahead and make sure we have it applied to everything in the scene. And there's a couple of ways we could do this. So I'm going to click on our static mesh template floor, and if we look over here inside the details panel, we can see element 0, and basically what that is that's a housing for the material. So when you import a mesh, depending on how many different materials you have assigned to the mesh, even if it is one single mesh, Unreal Engine understands that and it separates it by what's called elements. So in this case we only have one. So we could just drag and drop the material, left mouse click drag, and drop it here. That's one way to do it. Okay, but I'm not going to do that. Or we could, if we want to be more accurate, and in this case there's only one, but in future cases it will be useful to know that we could just simply come over here and there's a white arrow that says use selected asset from content browser. And this is the theme that carries all the way through the engine, but we're going to go ahead and select this and then hit the white arrow and we'll see it update. Now it's kind of, there we go, a little bit more apparent now that the black material showed up. Okay, so let's select this and do the same thing, except for on this one we can see that there are actually two material elements. So I'll go ahead and demonstrate what I was speaking to earlier. Let's drag and drop this on there, and what you can see is it only did part of the mesh, and that's because they have a different material assigned to the other part. So we drag and drop, and let's go ahead and grab this one and fill that in as well. Okay, great. So now that we have our basic scene set up with our material, let's talk about lighting real quick. We want to make sure we have a good lighting environment, kind of something a little bit neutral and natural, just a preview in for right now. I want to go ahead and grab this the player start. I want to move it out of the way, and I'm just selecting that up here in the scene outliner. Just in case we do start, we don't want to be starting kind of colliding with that mesh. Okay, so let's talk about lighting real quick. We have our light source in the scene, and that's fine, and that's exactly what we want, but we want to kind of elaborate on this just a little bit. So the first thing that comes to mind is what's called a skylight, and what that does is it kind of simulates a bounce light from the sky, and it kind of pulls the color and the brightness from there, and it kind of bounces light on the ground, and so we can do that easily just by going to lights, and here it is right here, skylight. I'm going to left click drag that into the scene, and immediately when I pull that into the scene you can see that light hitting the surface down there. Okay, so that's something nice to have. The other thing that we want to do is called a sphere reflection capture. So over here under visual, here it is right here, sphere reflection capture. We're going to left click drag this onto the scene as well, and basically what this does is going to help us simulate our reflections. Okay, so we're not going to get too much into that right now. We're just going to leave it as it is, and we're going to move forward. But basically a lot of engines use this kind of technique now, where it kind of grabs pixel information and lighting information from the surrounding environment and then casts it onto everything around it. So the last thing that we need to do is set up what's called a light mass import and volume, and that's just going to give us a more specific area to bake in, so the engine understands that this is what we want to bake, and not to worry about everything else, and that'll give us a cleaner, better result as well. So if we go over here under volumes, we're going to scroll down to light mass import and volume, and we're going to drop that in the scene, and we're just going to scale this up just a little bit. All right, scale it up a little this way, and make sure we're covering our bases all the way around, and not too much further outside of it. So we can actually go up here to this perspective button up here, and we can say top, and we can view this from the top down if we wanted to. Because you can see I've actually expanded it too far, and then we can go to the side, and we can move it up a little bit. There we go, and just house everything that we have in there just to be nice and clean, and we will go back to perspective. Alright, now select that and hit F, Alright, so now that we have all this stuff in the scene, it's a little bit distracting, at least when we're not working on that stuff. So if we actually hit G on the keyboard, we can free up some screen real estate and get a cleaner preview. And if we wanted to do that one step farther, we can actually hit F11, and that will give us a full screen preview. Okay, great. So we're almost done here. There's only a couple more things we want to talk about real quick, so I'll hit F11 to go back out of full screen. First thing we want to do is bake the lights. Okay, so now that we have our lighting environment set up, let's go ahead and get a bake, just a quick bake. And so it's up underneath the build button, and if you use this drop down menu, there's a couple of things that we want to look at. First is the lighting quality. It should be set to preview by default, and that's all we really want for right now. We will talk about a production bake in a little while. And the second is that we only want to build the lighting. We don't want to just go up there and hit the build button. We don't have any gameplay elements in the scene to build. And we don't even want to waste time calculating or thinking about it. We just want to build lighting only. So I'm just going to hit that real quick. Okay, and a quick pause there while it baked, and it is done now. And so it's kind of hard to see because everything is black, but we are getting a really nice balanced light from the ground now, and that kind of cleaned everything up just a little bit. And we'll talk about techniques to improve this lighting environment and to kind of improve the resolution of these maps a little bit later on, but for right now this is going to do exactly what we need it to do. And finally, before we move on, the last thing I want to talk about is saving. So in this engine, everything that you make needs to be saved kind of separately, or you can save it all together, but every material instance, the scene itself, anything you import does need to be saved. And we can tell that it needs to be saved because it has this little asterisk in the bottom left hand corner of the icon inside of the content browser. And basically what it's telling us is you've modified it, you've made changes, and you haven't saved it. So what we could do is we could right click here and we could go down and hit save. Okay. Or we can just go up to File and hit Save All. Alright, that's what I'm going to do. And because we haven't actually named our map, we're going to go ahead and it's going to ask us for that. So I'm going to go inside the Maps folder, and as everything else is titled, we will call this Map Tutorial. Material Tutorial, sorry. Save that. And now if we were to hit File, Save All, okay, it's just going to save everything. It's not going to ask us any more questions. Okay, great. So with all of that wrapped up, let's go ahead and move on to the next tutorial where we'll start creating our master material. Okay, so welcome back. Here in part 2, we're going to talk about the albedo base setup. So inside the material editor, we're going to set up a base color. We're going to talk about basic principles like constants and scalar parameters. We're going to give ourselves the ability to use a 2D texture, and we'll talk about how to get those into the material editor as well. We'll use some static switch parameters to give ourselves control over our material and make decisions on the fly in real time inside the engine. We'll organize inside the material editor with groups, comments, and descriptions, and we'll talk about how those can be useful not only to you but to other people that might be working on the same project and sharing the same files. We'll get into material instancing and what that's all about and why we want to do it, and we'll create our own and we'll use it here in the engine. And we'll also get into some small adjustments like saturation and hue on our textures. Alright, so without further ado, let's go ahead and continue with part 2. Okay, so here in this tutorial, we want to go ahead and open up our material and start talking about some of the basic functions as far as plugging in some parameters and setting up some functionality with material instances so that we have control dynamically over our material so that we can make quick iterations in the engine in real time. So without further ado, let's go ahead and open up our material. So over here in the content browser underneath the game folder, I can see my material tutorial folder I created, and inside it is the m_material tutorial material that I created. So all I had to do is actually left click twice on this to pull up the material editor. Now there's lots of interface here happening, but mine is set to default right now, and most of this is not going to directly influence what we're doing right this moment. And a lot of it we'll kind of stumble on and discover as we move forward with this. Now yours might look a little bit different, but for the most part you should be seeing the same thing that I'm seeing. Okay, so the first thing that we notice is kind of this big grid light table in front of us, and if anyone's listening is used to UDK, then it's basically the same setup, except that you'll notice we're writing from left to right now, and UDK was actually the other way around. But other than that, it functions in a lot of the same ways. I can move around in here using the right mouse click button. I can drag select using the left mouse, and I can zoom in and out using the mouse wheel. So fairly simple navigation. Over here I have a palette window, which is basically a list of all of our math and nodes that we have available to us. Okay, so we'll be searching this quite frequently, and we can actually access this same thing by right clicking on the table, and it will pull up this palette for us in here as well. A couple of really important windows also are the viewport, which is our real-time viewport. Fairly self-explanatory, like most programs. Left mouse click to zoom around, pan around, and right mouse click zoom in and out. And we can actually hold L on the keyboard to kind of move our light around the scene. We can change the mesh up here. The teapot can house our own private mesh, which we're not using right now, but we could pull in a personal mesh. And if we were using very proprietary textures for that specific thing, then we might want to view it on that specific thing, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on. And then we have a real-time toggle and a grid. So I'm going to go ahead and turn the grid off actually. Down here in the details panel, this detail panel, it's going to update based off what we have selected. So right now we have nothing selected in the scene. And so what it's giving us details and information on is the actual shader that we're using. So if we take a look at this base node over here, there's some things that are kind of grayed out, and that's because our shader is telling us that we don't need them right now. So if we wanted to, for example, activate tessellation and displacement or opacity or subsurface color later on, we could do that by coming over here and changing some of the shader values. But we're not going to get too much into that right now. Our shader currently houses everything that we need to go ahead and set up our master material and do some of the basics. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is we want to come in here and we want to take a look at what's called the base color input. Alright, and in our case, since this will be a physically based system that we're taking advantage of, this will serve as our albedo. And of course that could just be a solid color, or it could be a texture. And ideally we want to be able to choose between the two, right? So right now we're going to go ahead and set up a basic solid color. And to try and kind of help you understand how this works is, let's break it down just a little bit. So if we observe what a base color is, it's usually three values. It's a red, a green, and a blue channel value. So what we need is we need a way to plug in basically three numbers into there. And there's a really convenient way to do that, and it's called a constant. So if we come over here into the palette and we start typing in constant, it's going to pull these up for us. And the first thing I see is a constant, and then I see a constant 2, a 3, and a 4. Alright? So actually what we want is the constant 3 vector. And what that's going to do is going to house three separate numbers that stay constant all the time, and those can act as our base color. So there's a few ways for me to get this in the scene. I can just left click, drag it, and drop it in there. And we have one. I could observe the hotkey right here, which is 3, so I could come back over to my table, just delete this. We'll hold 3 on the keyboard and left mouse click, and that will bring it up. Or, as I stated before, we could access the palette here on the table, and we could just say constant, type it in, scroll down, and hit enter. So those are all ways that you can access that. I think it's best to learn the hotkeys when at all possible, and they're conveniently located over here in the palette. And this really just improves your workflow and increases the speed that you're able to work at. So let's go ahead and plug this in real quick and see what happens over here in our real-time preview. So the way we plug it in is left click over this little white circular arrow looking thing and drag it and drop it to the like icon over here for base color. Alright, and you can see that it did a quick compiled real quickly, but nothing happened because the default value is already black. And that's important to note, that there are default values for all these. So these are not just empty values. Everything in here actually has a default value, except for normal map. So when we plug this in, we haven't really changed the default. So if we want to change it, there's a couple of ways we could do that. We could just double click on the node and we get our color pick, and we could just come over here and we could change it around. We could hit the advanced button to come down here and type in specific numbers, like 1 for red. Alright, and that gives us one value for red, and so obviously our preview is going to be red. We could come down here into the details panel and we could change that from 1 red to 1 green. Alright, or we could just click twice on this window, which is the same as the window on the node, and we can make changes here as well. So I'll just go down and do 1 for blue. Alright, so what we actually want to do is I just want to plug in a 1 value for all these to get a solid white color, and we want to see this update in our scene. Okay, so I'll just free up some screen space here, hit F11 on the keyboard to go full screen, and the way we do that is just by hitting the apply button. Now there's a save button up here as well, and the save will force an apply. However, sometimes you want to make changes, and you're just you're kind of messing around. You're not really sure how it's going to work out, and you don't want to save it. You just want to apply it. Also, saving can take time. So if we just hit the apply button real quick, we won't save the changes, but we will go ahead and force an update in the scene. And now that bake lighting that we were getting is a little bit more apparent, and we can tell what's going on in our scene a little bit better. All right. So the first problem that presents itself at this stage is, what if we decided we don't want it white? We want it red. Well, in order to change that currently, what we would have to do is we would have to open up the material editor. We'd have to come over here, click on it, and we'd have to change our values. All right, come over here and hit apply and let it update. And that's not always the end of the world, but when you're creating materials for environment art or anything else, sometimes you're making changes quickly. Sometimes you just want to be able to grab something that looks like it's out of place and quickly just shift the hue or desaturate it or darken it up or what have you, without having to open up every window and kind of come in here and manipulate the core. So what we can do is we can make this publicly available for us to update in real time. Alright, so let's go ahead back in here, and first thing, let's just go ahead and set it all back to white, and we'll hit apply. Alright, and let's go back into our content browser by hitting F11. And the first thing we need to do is we need to create what's called a material instance. And basically what a material instance does is it takes the compiled material and it instances it, and it gives us the ability to change any public information that we've created for ourselves on the fly in real time without having to wait for it to recompile. So if we go over to our game folder under material tutorials, and we find our material, and we right click on top of it and say create material instance, and this is now instanced that material, and it gives us the same name with an underscore inst at the end. I'm actually going to delete that. I want to change the prefix to mi for material instance and hit enter. Alright, so like we opened up the material, and we're trying to get an autosave right here, so I'm just going to hit cancel. We're going to open up this the same way by clicking twice on it. And what we'll notice is we get a different window for the material instance. So instead of getting the material editor like this one, we get the material instance editor. And this is where the magic happens. Now right now, if we go over here and look under our details panel, we have some material overrides. And basically this is that shader information I was talking to you about. So if we go back over here and we click off everything, this details panel, we could change this shader information. Well, we have the ability to override it here as well. So we're just going to minimize that. We don't want to mess with that right now. And then we have the material editor instance constant. And what that is it's asking what parent the material is, or what master material this belongs to, in other words. And since we right clicked and we created it, it already assumes this by default, and I recommend always doing it that way. It's just a clean way to do it. There's no reason not to do it that way, and it will assume the parent, which is nice. So we don't need to change that either. So when we minimize that, we notice that we have nothing available to us, and that's because we haven't created any public parameters yet. Okay, so in order to do that, let's go back into our material, and let's figure out how to make this public so that we can actually change it in our material instance. Alright, and there's a really simple solution for almost any node that will provide us with our answer, and we can just right click on it and say convert to parameter. And what that's done now is it's converted it to a public parameter that we can change on the fly, and it's asking us for a name. So we're just going to go ahead and call this base color, hit enter. Okay, and without doing anything else, let's go ahead and apply and go back over to our material instance, and what we see now is we have a new tab that says parameter groups, and underneath vector parameters, because that's what it was a constant 3 vector, we now see this one that we've titled base color. Okay, so let's go back into our engine. And before we do anything else, let's actually apply our, I'm just going to move this off screen here. Let's go ahead and apply our material instance to everything. So I'm going to drag and drop it here. And then I'm going to select our mesh here, and I'm just going to pull it onto both of these just to make sure. Hit F11 to zoom back in. And that is important to know. You do have to have the material instance applied in order to see the changes. Alright, so if I want to change this, what do I have to do? Well, first we have to check mark this box right here. And what this box is saying is basically, hey, I want to modify the default value. So we have our default value set to white. We left click, letting the engine know that we want to change it. And now we can change this in real time on the fly and get really accurate results really quickly. Alright, and this is kind of the core to everything that we're going to be talking about in this tutorial series. It's kind of the fundamental idea that fuels this whole operation. Is being able to come in here and quickly make changes, desaturate, whatever it is we want to do, anything we can think of that we feel like we're going to use regularly, we can go ahead and build into this. Okay, so let's hit OK. And there's a couple of things to look at here. What if we want to go back to our default? Well, there's a little green arrow here that we can always hit. It says reset to default. And what that will do is turn it back to white. So we'll go ahead and do that now. Okay, let's go back to another color. What if I want to experiment with, say, a texture? I want to plug a texture in, but I don't want to lose this color in case I decide to come back to it. Well, in that case, we can just uncheck this, which will basically tell the engine to disregard any modifications we've made without actually losing the value. So now we can come in, we can plug our albedo in, we can say, that's, say we're going for something stylized, that's too real, let's go back to our base color. We can come back and we can activate that, and it will retain that value. Alright, material instances, just like materials, do need to be saved. So if we hit F11, we can see that now both of these have the little asterisk, and they both need to be saved. So we'll go ahead and come up here and hit File, Save All, and we'll go back into our material instance. Okay, so before we move on too much, let's go ahead and get ourselves organized real quick. So we were able to give ourselves a title right over here under parameter name. And the next thing that we see is group, and it says none. And so what's happening is we haven't assigned it a location. There's no domain for this. It doesn't live anywhere, and therefore the engine assumes a default location, which we saw was vector parameter values. And that's not always the most intuitive way to look at your material instance, especially if you're handing it off to other artists and they're going to be using it as well. So what we want to do is we want to organize it. Okay. Now what I usually do is I create a group that's called base, and that base will house my basic roughness value, my specular, if there is one, my base color, and it will also house some switches that we're going to add in just a moment that will allow me to open up other groups. So right now we're going to go ahead and create this base group, just typing in base, and we'll hit apply, go over to our material instance, and now we can see that underneath parameter groups it looks a little bit more clean, and we have base, and underneath it we have base color. Okay. And finally, we can give ourselves a description. And what a description does, this is a really powerful tool in my opinion. It gives you the ability to tell the end user important information. So if we wanted to come in here and say controls base color hue and hit enter, well, we can see it ourselves in here, and that's nice. But really what's more important to me is that when we apply this and go over to the material instance, let's just say for example that this was not obvious or apparent what it does, they could just hold their mouse over this value and they'll get the note that we sent. So base controls base color hue, which is nice to be able to do when we get more complex scenarios happening with this master material. Okay. And finally, what we want to do is we want to select our node and we want to hold C on the keyboard. And what this does is it creates a comment box, and we'll just go ahead and call this albedo, because we're going to group everything in here underneath this comment box that has anything to do with our albedo. And we can left click, drag, and make the box a little bit bigger. And what this does is it gives us the ability to kind of move this stuff around as one piece. And this comes in really handy when we're zoomed way out here and we just have 100 nodes floating around and we just want to grab everything that has to do with base color, move it up and out of the way. Alright, so that's a nice thing to have. Alright, so let's go ahead and introduce a texture. What if we want to plug an albedo in? Okay, well, let's talk about how to get a texture in here first. There's a couple of ways we can do this. We can right click to open up our palette, and we can begin to type in texture, and we can scroll down here to texture sample and hit enter, and that will pull up our texture sample, but it's blank. We could have done the same thing over here, just type in texture and pull it up, drag and drop into the scene. Or we could just hold T on our keyboard and left click, which is the hotkey. Okay, and this gives us the node, but we'll notice if we plug it in, we get an error, and that's because it's missing an input texture. We don't have anything in here yet. And there's a few different ways to get that information. The first way I want to talk about is going into the content browser, and we'll go under the default texture folder, and we'll grab something. Let's just say, for example, let's just do these cobblestones. And we just want to left mouse click on that and come back into our material editor. And we have this white arrow again that says use selected asset from content browser. And this is the same philosophy that we used in the engine earlier to apply our materials. So if we grab this, it will actually import that texture for us. Okay, so that's one way to do it. Another way to do it is, now that we already have that texture selected, if we hold T and left click, when we create it, it will assume that we want to use that. Okay, so we could just have it already selected. You know, say we import our albedo, we select it, and we come in here and we hit T, and there we go. And finally, the last way to do it is to simply just drag and drop it into the editor. Okay, all three of these are going to give you the same thing. So I'll just delete those two, and we'll have this plugged in. But again, we're not going to be able to change this to anything because it's not a parameter. This is just in the engine. So what we want to do is right click and say convert to parameter. Alright, and we'll go ahead and call this albedo, albedo base, if I could spell it correctly. Albedo base. Alright, and we'll go ahead and stretch our comment box to include this information now, so we can move these together. And we have it plugged in, so we can hit apply, and we can go ahead and preview this on our mesh. So I hit F11 so we can see, and you can see that this is updated. Now if we go over to our material instance, under texture parameter values, we can see our albedo base, and just like anything else, we could check mark this box telling the engine that we want to modify it, and we can grab, say for example, this one, which is actually the albedo, and we can grab that and we can import that. Okay, so this works just like any other value that we plugged in. But we did not put it under a new group, so let's go back and take care of that real quick. And let's create a new group, and we want to call this albedo. And I just cannot spell that today. Albedo. Alright. And we will just type in under here base albedo, well, we'll say texture. Okay, and we'll go ahead and apply, and we can go back to our material instance and see that that now lives under albedo, and base is still here, but since it's not plugged in, it understands that there's a group and it wants to inform us that there's a group, but there's actually nothing underneath it to use because we've unplugged it. Alright, so finally, before we move on, we want to talk about how to choose between these two things. So how do we let the artist choose between using a base color and albedo? Well, this is actually really simple, so we'll give ourselves some extra space here, and we'll right click and we'll start to type in static. Alright, down here we can see static switch, which is what we want, but again, that's not going to give us the ability to update it in the material instance, because as we know, we need to convert it to a parameter. Well, everything so far I've dropped on the table, and I've done the right click convert to parameter. But what's worth mentioning is everything, for the most part, actually has an alternative parameter that you can pull from the get-go. And what I mean by that is I could grab this static switch, right, and I could right-click on it and say convert to parameter, like everything else. Except for in this case, you'll notice that it doesn't have that, which is why it's important to understand that when you type in stuff, you can actually scroll down and find the parameter version of it. So this one has a static switch parameter. So if we click on that, we have the parameter by default. And we'll call this has albedo. Alright, and we'll delete the other one. Alright, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. That could be a little bit confusing, but basically later on we'll show some hotkeys to pull these out of the palette, having already been set to a parameter, so that we don't have to right click and say convert. Okay. Alright, so what the switch does is it's a true-false statement, and basically it's asking you, if true, then what? And if false, then what? And then we're going to feed these things in here, and we're going to feed this into the base color. So right off the bat, we know that this needs to go into base color. And I want to take the opportunity to show you a way to kind of rearrange, because sometimes we'll have a complex node set up and you don't really want to start rewiring everything. So if we just wanted to move this, say for example from here to here, we can actually hold control on the keyboard and left mouse move it right over there. Okay, which is really convenient later on. And we get an error because it's missing an A input and missing a B input, and so it doesn't know what to do. Well, if it has an albedo, and that's true, then it has an albedo, right? So we'll go ahead and plug that in for true. If it's not true, then what do we want? Well, if it's not true, we want the base color. Alright, and it just so happens that static switches, if you click on it and go to the details panel, they have a default value as well. Unchecked means false and checked means true. So what this is telling the engine is, by default, I want to use a base color. But if someone wanted to change it, then they could open up the has albedo switch, they could turn it to true, and then they can plug in their albedo. Alright, so let's go ahead and group this, and we want this in our base, and I'll show you why. We want this right in there, and we want to describe this, so we say activates albedo base texture, and hit enter. Alright, we'll go ahead and apply this, and we'll go to our material instance. Alright, and what we can see is by default it's assuming that we want to use this hue, this base color. And underneath base, if we wanted to change that, located right underneath it is the has albedo. So first we want to tell the engine, okay, I want to modify you. So it recompiled with the possibility of having a new instruction set. And then once we tell it we want to modify, we just come over here and we check mark yes for true. And now what you see happen is the hue disappears. We can't access it any longer. We don't need it any longer. And instead, what happens is the albedo now shows up underneath the albedo. Alright, so if I go back under here and I disable this, we get our hue back and the albedo is now inaccessible. Alright, so now that we have that basic functionality set up, let's go ahead and activate it again, pull up our albedo, and we want to be able to set up some basic functions to be able to modify our albedo. So if we go back into our material, move the switch way over here, make a little bit more room. The first thing we want to be able to do is change the hue of our albedo, and that comes in handy a lot. So in other words, instead of deciding that our bricks are too red and going into Photoshop and having an update, we could just use a very simple instruction set in here to be able to change it on the fly. Alright, so this is going to be what's called a multiply node. Now we could do it the usual way by typing it over here. What I'm going to do is hold M for the short key on the keyboard and left mouse click and pull up the multiply node. And this is just basic math, and what it's going to do is we have three values here. Okay, and anytime we multiply, we want to multiply by the same number of values. What I mean by that is we could not pull up something that houses 2 values and multiply it by 3 values. It won't work, it'll give us an error. So we already know of something that houses 3 values, and in fact it's right here. It's called a constant 3 vector parameter. Alright, so instead of having to create one from scratch, we could just select this and hit Control W on the keyboard and move it up. Okay, and this one we want to retitle it a little bit. We want to call this albedo hue, and we want this to be found underneath the albedo. So it actually does remember our groups over here. So if we use the drop down menu, we can select albedo from there. We want the default value to be white, and we could say controls albedo texture hue. Hit enter. And now we want to multiply these together. So again, we want to move this output to over here. And then we want to drag the white from there and the white from here to multiply. And let's observe what's happening here. So right now our switch is set to default, so it's still reading this value over here. And we could turn this to true, like so. And it will start reading this instruction set, but we really don't want to do that because we might forget to change it back, and that could cause problems for us later. So instead, we have another way to preview this little isolated bit of instruction. And there's actually a couple of ways. So we can hit the drop down menu on the multiply node and we can see it here. And if I right click and say enable real-time preview, what that will do is when we click on this and we change the hue to red, for example, we can see that update in the node. Now sometimes that's great, sometimes that's what we want, but sometimes we have a chain event happening and we want to be able to see the end result on here, and sometimes it's just not feasible to really get in here and kind of look at what's happening inside of a node. So what we can actually do is select this node, which is the end result of this math, and we can right click, and different from the real-time preview, which is only inside of the node, we can hit start previewing node, and what that does is it disregards the rest of the information and it only previews that bit of instruction over here. So now we can see clearly what's happening. If I change the albedo hue to blue, then it takes that that color with it. Okay, so we'll stop previewing. We have everything plugged in, and we'll go ahead and hit apply. We'll go into our material instance and we can see that that is updated. Okay, and if we select the albedo hue, tell it we want to modify, we can change this around in real time. So we could give our rocks a little bit more red color like they were muddy, or we could come over here and give them a little bit of a yellow tint. Before we get too far, let's go ahead back here and let's set our albedo hue back to RGB1 so we get a nice clean white. And we will apply that. So now by default, if we hit the green arrow, everything goes back to white, and we can now manipulate this. Right? So we'll say that we want to give it a little bit of a reddish tint, like so. Alright, so that's cool so far. And the last thing I want to do before we move on is just add a basic desaturation node. So what we want to do is we want to take this chain of instructions and we want to run it through a desaturation node that gives us the ability to desaturate whatever's coming out of here. And we want to desaturate after the color in this case. So let's right click on the table and we'll start typing in desaturation, and you can see that right here underneath color we have a desaturation node. Alright, and this engine's really good about it's kind of tells you what it requires to make its calculation. So the first thing it requires is the input, which is going to be this one. So let's move this over here and let's drag it in. Okay, and the next thing is going to be a fraction, and we want to be able to control the fraction. Alright, so let's right click on this and say start previewing node, and we can see the result right here, and that's because we're not desaturating by any value. So what we want to do is we want to plug in a number. Now we could plug in that constant that we talked about right here, and then we could convert it to a parameter, or we could just start with the parameter, which is called a scalar parameter. So if we hold S on the keyboard and left click, oops, and I held it too long, this pulls up basically what's a constant 1, and it's called a scalar, and we can see that right down here, and it gives us one value that's parameterized that we can change inside the material instance editor. So we'll call this albedo saturation. Alright, and we want to group this underneath albedo, and we'll come down here and give an extra description: albedo texture saturation. Enter. Alright, and we'll go ahead and plug this into fraction. Okay, so what we're doing is we're saying multiply this by a color, and then take that result, and if we want to desaturate it, then we can desaturate it. Now right now the base is set to 0, so it's not actually pulling any saturation out. If I were to set this to 1, well, let's go ahead and change this to a red color so we can see. We can see that even though we've changed it to a red color, we've then gone in and completely desaturated. So if I hit the drop down here, right click and say enable real time, we've taken the color back out. Alright, so we could set it to like 0.5 for example, and what it does is it gives us a really good way to pick a solid color and then kind of pull back and withdraw just a little bit of that information. Alright, so we'll set this back to 0, we'll set this back to 1, 1, and 1, hit OK, hit apply, let it compile really quick, and we'll go back into our material instance, and now we can see we have albedo saturation. Alright, so if we were to start toning this up, we can see that we can kind of get in there with a kind of a really fine granularity, and we can really just change this by really small percentages. If we take it to the negative, obviously it's going to oversaturate, and we'll talk about how to flip this around later so that it kind of makes more sense, since we did call it saturation. Alright, so that's the basic setup for what we need for everything in our albedo. So we can actually grab this comment box, move it up here out of the way, and in our next lesson we'll go ahead and tackle roughness. Alright, so welcome back for part 3. In this video we're going to talk about setting up the roughness map, the metal map, and the normal, or at least a basic normal for now. So we're going to discuss roughness values and what they mean in Unreal Engine and what roughness means, and we're also going to set up a map. We're going to do the same thing with metal. We're going to talk about having metal off and on and give ourselves the ability to make that switch in the engine in real time, and also talk about using maps. We're going to talk about mask and how we can use mask to multiply against other functions to define where we want the pixels information to come through and where we don't. We're going to set up our basic normal map parameter, and we're going to create a little math equation that's going to help control our normal intensity so that we can go in the engine and we can ramp up the intensity non-destructively. We're also going to discuss clamps and what they mean and how they can be beneficial at times, and just overall basic fundamental math that you'll be using just throughout your process of making materials with Unreal Engine 4. Alright, so let's move on to part 3. Okay, so in this video we want to go ahead and tackle roughness. And this is going to go by fairly quickly, so we'll probably go ahead and tackle roughness, metallic, and normal. But before we get too far into things, let's go ahead and talk about how roughness works in physical-based rendering. So basically, some engines use gloss, some use roughness, and roughness is basically the inverted value of a gloss. So in a gloss map, a value of white, which is equal to 1, would be all the way glossy. In a roughness map, a value of white, or a value of 1, it's all the way rough. So gloss would actually be black. Okay, so we're going to start to demonstrate this by using a value. And roughness only needs a single value to work. It's a grayscale system if you were using a map. So let's go ahead and start with that scalar parameter that we used over here for our fraction and our desaturation. And let's go ahead and create one for roughness. So again, I'm going to hold S on the keyboard and left click, and again I held it too long. And we're going to type in roughness base value. Alright, we're just going to go ahead and plug that in, and it's already a parameter because we started off as a scalar. We'll come down here and create a, actually we don't want to create a new group, we just want to plug this into base. And our default value for roughness was actually, it was 0.5. Alright, so we talked about having default values before, and it's 0.5. And so when we plug this in, it should have gotten extremely glossy. But what's happening is we never stopped previewing the desaturation node over here. So let me go back up to that, and we'll right click on that and we'll say stop previewing node. Okay, and that just brings back our normal instruction for our base color. And now what we can see is when we changed our roughness value, so I'll just unplug it by holding Alt left click, you can see that it's kind of semi-matte right here, it's 0.5. And when I plug this in, it gets extremely glossy. Okay, if I were to go into the details panel and turn this value up to 1, you can see that it's completely matte. And the thing is no matter how far past 1 I go, it doesn't matter. So if I go to 100, we see no change. If I go to negative 100, it's the same as 0. Okay, so it's clamped at 0 and 1. So what we can do is we can put that in the description box. We can say roughness value, and then we can just put 0 to 1. Okay, and we have that in the correct group, and I just want to set it at 0.5 for a default value, so that we're not looking at something extremely shiny all the time by default. We'll go ahead and apply this. Okay, and we'll go back to our scene, hit F11, and what I want to do right now is come in here to the base, and we'll select the option to modify, and we can turn this down in real time. Okay, which is really nice. And so we can get this really glossy, kind of shiny result with some screen space reflections and the sphere capture working in there, so we're getting some really nice results. And it's just that easy, and oops, I accidentally duplicated something. It's really easy to get this result, and we could turn that back up to 0.5 to see something more natural. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to go ahead and give ourselves the ability, just like we did with the albedo, to use a texture. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to copy this switch by holding Control W, and we're going to say in the description box, activates roughness base texture. And now we want to create a new group, and we want this to be roughness. Oops, one more S there. Okay. So if it's true, then we need a texture, which is actually this texture here. So we'll just copy it because I grabbed the wrong texture to begin with. All right, we'll just copy that, and we'll call this one roughness, and that of course goes in the roughness group. All right. And the description for that would be base roughness texture. All right. And so if true, if has roughness texture, then that, and if false, then we want to use the value. And the last thing we need to do is set our switch up. So the switch is in roughness group already. We just need to retitle it roughness. I guess I left that out. Alright, we'll grab this whole thing, left mouse click drag, hit C on the keyboard, we'll comment, and we will call this entire group roughness. Alright, we'll move that out of the way. Go ahead and apply that, and let's go back in here. Alright, so right now I'm using a value. If I go to my material instance, I can control this value underneath base. Alright, set that back to default and then check. And actually, I'm recognizing right now that we actually put the switch in the wrong spot. So I'm going to go back to the switch, and I actually want that switch to be under base. And as we move along, it'll begin to make more sense what this base is. And this base is kind of your control center, so to speak. So if I go back under base and I tell it that I want to use a roughness, left click, it will open up my roughness panel, and now we have the appropriate roughness values taking effect in here. And so we're starting to look like something a little bit more realistic now. Alright, and that's pretty much all we want to do with the roughness right now for the time being. So let's go ahead back into the material, and let's do the same thing for a metallic. So the metallic is fairly self-explanatory. If you have a value of 1 in metal, then it will render it as if it were metal. If you have a value of 0, then it's not metal, and anything in between is not really recommended. But there are cases, say for example you have metal that's been sitting around for 20 years and it's really dusty on top. Well, then you might want to use a metallic mask to help you kind of separate that material definition. So what we need is we actually need the same exact setup here. We need a comment box, and inside of it we want our metalness mask, and then we want a metal value, and then we want the toggle. So actually what we're going to do is we're going to grab this whole thing, and we'll save real quick. We're going to hit Control W on the keyboard and just duplicate the entire thing. Alright, we need to be thorough here and come back and make sure that we retitle everything. So if I click on my comment box, I can just retitle this to metalness. Alright, we'll change our roughness base to metal base, and we'll create a new group, metal. Alright, and under the description we'll say base metal texture. Alright, so that's that one. Under the roughness base value, we want to use metal base value. We want to keep it in the base group, and we want to call this metal value down here. Alright, and then finally the switch. We want that to stay in the base, but we want it to say has metalness. Oh, we'll just say has metalness. Alright, and we want to say this activates the metalness base texture. Alright, and it looks like misspelled here. Alright, and what we'll do is we'll go ahead and set this at a default of 0, which is the engine default. So you'll notice that our material, as we're looking at it, is not metal, and we want to keep it that way for the time being. And I want to show you the difference it makes. Okay, so right now we're not looking at a metal surface. When I change this value to 1, you can see it makes a huge difference. I mean, you've got some really nice kind of Fresnel and some different specular values, and it really works really well. And there's usually this is something that can be quite a trick to achieve, and this engine does it for you. So we'll go ahead and set that back to default. We'll go ahead and apply everything. Go to our material instance, and let's take a look inside the editor. So right now with the value of 0 for metalness, it looks as it should. And if we go to base and we change the metalness value to 1, you can see that now this is going to act like metal. Alright, and anything in between, again, is just going to give you some kind of weird, not quite metal, not quite not metal results, and sometimes that can be desired, but for the most case you want to stay at 0 or 1. So we'll put that back at default. Alright, and finally let's go ahead and do a setup for our normal map as well. Alright, so we'll come back to specular and emissive in the next one, and we'll also tackle ambient occlusion. But for now we really need to go ahead and tackle normal. So here's how we're going to do normal. Normal, there's some intensity that we want to be able to affect. I'm just going to move some stuff out of the way and make some room real quick. We want to be able to change the intensity of our normal map, and that can be a little bit tricky to set up. But with some basic math principles, I think we can fly through this quite quickly. So first things first, let's go ahead and set up a normal map. So I'm just going to hold 2 on the, I'm going to right click and type in 2D and pull the texture sample parameter 2D in. And we're going to call this normal base. Okay, and we're going to go over here, hit F11, go into our content browser and grab the cobblestone normal. And we'll come in here and hit our white arrow and pull that in. Alright, so we can go ahead and plug that in and apply, and we can see that it's that simple to get our normal map up and running. So now we have a full-blown material with all of our textures up and running, and we could literally instance this material over and over again and basically create most of the content in our game with just this simple setup. Okay, and that's just the power of material instancing, and because it's already been compiled, they'll be essentially free to you, and that's just a really good way to go about setting up a base material. But what if, say for example, I wanted to beef up the normal without having to go to Photoshop and you know, do any trickery in there to kind of give myself some more Z depth? What if I just want to do it right here in the engine? Well, we can do that. I'm going to show you how. Alright, so to get started with this, let's go back into the engine. And let's bring our normal over here, and let's give ourselves some space to work. Alright, and before we get too far, let's go ahead and create a new group for normal. And let's go ahead and put in the description box that this is the normal base texture. Okay. And we'll go ahead and save this. As a matter of fact, this is probably a good time to go ahead and save everything. Alright, so we'll just go up here to File, Save All, make sure we got our bases covered. Alright, so for this normal texture, just like anything, we'll double click and open up the texture editor. So if we click on our node here, and then go down to the texture and click twice, it will actually pull up the texture editor where we can see this normal, and we can actually break down the channels. Okay, so what's important about a normal is that the blue channel kind of serves as a base, and it's really the green and the red channel that bring in most of the lighting information. So if we take a look at the red channel, what we're getting is left to right lighting information. If we take a look at the green channel, we're getting top to bottom lighting information. Okay, and if we look at the blue channel, it's kind of an overall lighting information. And just as a side note, we don't have to do it here, but if you are importing your own normal maps, make sure that the green channel is flipped. You can do it in the engine as well, flip green channel right here. So if I go ahead and look at everything, this one is already flipped properly, but this is what a normal map looks like. So the highlight should be on the top side. And when you flip it, it almost looks inverted. It looks like it should be protruding into it. And that's the way that the tangent system works in this engine. So just a little side note there, you can do it in the engine, you can do it in whatever application you're using before you export to the engine, but just be wary of that. So having said that, that means that we understand that we want to manipulate the green and the red channel, right? And so in order to beef that up, we want to multiply, but we don't want to multiply all three channels. We just want to multiply the red and the green. So let's go ahead and create a multiply node, and let's move this output over here because this is where we're going to end up, and let's plug this into A. Now the problem with this is we said earlier that we can't multiply two values by 3. So that causes a problem because we have a blue channel here that we don't want to multiply, but yet there has to be a value there in order to use this multiplication node. Okay, so to demonstrate this, what we're going to do is we're going to create a constant 3 by holding 3 on the keyboard and left clicking, and we're going to plug this into the multiply, and we're going to hit this drop down arrow and we'll say enable real-time preview. Alright, so because we're multiplying by 0, what we're getting is a black result. If we come in here and we set these all to 1, we're multiplying by 1, and anything multiplied by 1 is obviously the same. And so we're not seeing much change. As a matter of fact, we're not seeing any change. Okay, so when we look at this, we're still getting the normal map as it should be. Alright, and to further amplify this, let's go ahead and start previewing this node. Alright, so here's our normal map. Just as far as pixel information goes, you won't see light interact with it this way. It's just kind of showing you the pixel information. So if I come in here and I multiply the blue channel by, let's say, 10, what you'll see is that nothing really changes. The image gets brighter, and that's because of the bloom taking effect because we've pushed the value beyond 1. But other than that, we're not really seeing anything happen. And if we go to stop previewing node, alright, and we turn this back to 1, we can see our normal map. And if we turn this back to 10, what's actually happened is we've flattened the normal, which is not what we want. So we can kind of tell, we can just barely see some normal information there if you look really hard, like right there. We're flattening the normal, and that's because we're adding up all those layers of base normal, and that's not what we want. We want to keep this at 1. Okay, so let's go back to previewing this node. Now let's go over here to this, and let's multiply our R channel by 10. Alright, and our green channel by 10, and you can see the effect taking place. And I tell you what, let's just turn this down a little bit. Let's try 5 and 5. Okay, that's a little bit better. Alright, so if I stop previewing this node now, you can see that essentially what's happened is we've beefed up our normal. Okay, but this is kind of aggravating because we could convert this into a parameter, and then you could go on the engine and you could open it up and you could just know to yourself, or we could write in the description box, don't type anything for blue, only multiply red and green. But this could be kind of aggravating and be kind of hard to iterate quickly if you had to sit here and say, okay, that's too much, let's try 4.8, let's try 4.6, let's try 4, let's try 3. So what we want to do is be able to use a slider to manipulate this. So that means we need a little bit more math between here and here, because we need to drop this third value. As a matter of fact, we don't even need the third value. So let's delete this, and let's just create a constant 2 by holding 2 on the keyboard, and let's plug this in. Okay, so we get that error I was talking about, and I just want to demonstrate this really quick. We can't do it because we don't have enough values here. Okay, we don't have enough values. We're multiplying 2 against 3, and it doesn't know what to do with the third value. Alright, so let's go ahead and break that. So eventually we're going to have to add a value back to this, but for now let's just focus on raising both of these values simultaneously, which represent our red and green. Alright, so to do this, let's introduce another multiply node by holding M on the keyboard. Let's plug this into A, and let's create a scalar parameter by holding S, and we'll call this normal intensity. Alright, we'll plug this into B. Alright, so first of all, our RNG channel needs to be represented accurately, and they should be 1, right? We don't want to multiply by 0 because that would cancel it out. And even though we're multiplying this against that, we're also multiplying this against that. So if this is a 0, it will cancel that back to 0 anyway, which would still give us the same result of canceling everything out. So we want everything when multiplying to be a default of 1. And basically, you can multiply by 1 all day. No matter how many times you do it, you're still going to get the same result. And that's where you want your default to be. So now what happens is, if I were to look at this, I have yellow because we have a red value of 1 and a green value of 1, and we don't have any blue. Okay, and if I were to come over here and multiply this by 2 or 3, oops, or on up, you can see that nothing's happening, and that's because we are multiplying those at the same time. So we're always getting the same input. Alright, so let's go back to 1. Alright, so what this means is that we could then plug this into here, and every time we multiply this, it's going to multiply both of those digits, which is then multiplying both of these digits. So this is in turn affecting both of these. But the problem still remains that we don't have the third value. So what we need to do is we need to add one. And when I say add, I don't mean the addition. If we hold A on the keyboard, there is actually an add node. That's not what we want. We want what's called an append. So if we right click and type in append, basically what this does is there's no math involved. It just literally appends it to the math. So if we plug this into spot A, all right, and plug this in now. Now we have those two numbers coming in, and all we need is one additional number to represent blue that's not being filtered through this multiply. It's going to stay constant all the time. So we can just hold 1 on the keyboard and create a constant 1. And we don't need it to be a scalar parameter because we're never going to change it. So we can set the default to 1 here, and we can apply this. And now what's happening is we have a value of 1, 1, and 1, and you can see our multiply works. Okay. So now, as I turn this up, you can see that it's multiplying our red and green channel and then adding the blue channel, which is always a value of 1, and we get an intensified normal effect. So let's go ahead and turn this back to 1. Let's make sure that our normal intensity parameter is inside of the normal map. Alright, and let's clean this math up just a little bit and make some sense out of this. Okay, really important to stay organized as much as possible because later on in this project we're going to have nodes all over the place. Okay, and so we understand a little bit of what's happening. Let's left select everything, left click drag select, and we'll call this normal. Kind of position everything, a little bit better inside here. And we'll go ahead and we'll hit save, which will force and apply. We don't want to lose our work here. Now let's go into the editor and hit F11. Okay, so we have our roughness, we have our albedo, and we have our normal, and we have our metalness set to 0. Let's close this normal, and let's pull up the material instance. And now when we go into normal, we can select this normal intensity, and on the fly, we can begin to bulge this normal intensity out. Alright, so you can see that taking place in real time, which is nice, and it actually comes in handy quite often. Likewise, if you want to dull it down a little bit, right, if you want to flatten those stones out a little bit, we could do that fairly easily. Alright, and if you go below 0, what's going to happen? It's going to invert. Alright, so now the stones are now beveling in. And so there's a way to get around that if we don't want to use it, and I'll leave this up to you. In my case, I'm going to leave it open. Because I think that it could be valuable to be able to invert your normal, not in this case, but it could be. But for the sake of demonstration, what we're going to do is we're going to introduce what's called a clamp. So if we right click and type in clamp, so this is a piece of math that basically will take whatever happens before it and clamp it between two values. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to take all of this and move it over. We don't want to clamp that. What we want to clamp is this normal intensity. We don't want people to go below 0 because, well, then, you know, they could invert our normal. So what we'll do is the minimum default can stay 0. and we'll just set the max default something high like 1,000. And we'll go ahead and plug this in, and we will multiply that, and we'll apply. Alright, and that's not going to do anything inside of our material instance other than when we take our normal intensity down, down, down. Now you can see that when I go into the negative, it doesn't read those digits anymore. It just keeps it at 0. No matter how far I go, it keeps it at 0. Alright, and that's nice to have. And that might be worth noting in the description box that it is clamped. So we'll go ahead and we'll type in, we'll type in normal intensity, and then we'll type in 0 to 1,000. Alright. Now you might be asking, what is the min and the max here? Well, sometimes when you create a node, let's say a multiply node, you can see that it gives you digits. It assumes the A and the B input. So it assumes that A is 0 and B is 1. So if you wanted to multiply something by 0, you could plug it into the B and it will multiply it by a default value of 0 for A. Now so far we've always told the engine what we want to use. Okay, but we could come down here and we could just change the constants that are already plugged in. Now the reason we have this min max is because we can click on it and we can change the min max default inside of the details panel. But if we wanted to give the user control over it, we could actually plug in a scalar parameter to the minimum here and say minimum normal intensity clamp, which would give the end user the ability to then take it below 0. In most cases, it's a little bit redundant because you could just take it off and they could just know that they could put it at 0 manually and not have to worry about inverting. But there are specific cases where this could come in handy. So once again, we'll tidy everything up just a little bit. I think I made a little bit too much room. And we'll go ahead and apply this. And we'll come into the editor and hit File, Save All. And we'll go back into our material and move on to the next tutorial, which will be discussing the emissive channel and how we can get some cool effects out of that and kind of simulate lighting in our environment. Welcome back to part 4. In this session we're going to talk about the emissive base setup, and this is fairly straightforward. We want to give ourselves the ability to kind of simulate lighting in an environment, so things like lamppost, sci-fi paneling, things like that. So what we're going to do is we're going to create and establish the ability to turn emissive on, and also to give it a color and a power, and then also how to mask it to only certain areas of the map. Alright, so let's continue on with emissive part 4. Okay, so in this video we're going to talk about the emissive channel and how we can use that to our benefit to kind of give ourselves some simulated lighting in the environment, and also how we can mask that to certain parts of a texture. So let's go ahead and get started on that, and we need to make some room between the roughness and the normal. Since we have everything nice and tidied up in our comment boxes, this is fairly easy to do. And we'll go ahead and start with the emissive color. And so basically what an emissive is to demonstrate, let's go back to our sphere over here, and we'll hit F in here just to frame up because I lost it there. We can actually create an emissive color that is going to kind of span out from our mesh and give the illusion that there is light coming from it. Okay, so just like albedo color before, and anytime we've dealt with hue, we want to create a constant 3 that's going to represent our color, and we'll go ahead and convert that to a parameter, and we'll title this emissive. Alright, and we'll go ahead and create a new group for emissive, and in our description box we'll type in emissive color. Okay, so let's grab this and drag it all the way over here, plug it into emissive color. Alright, and nothing happened, and that is of course because the default is black. So if we were to change this to white, we can see now that our mesh is glowing. So I want to go ahead and apply this. We're going to come into our scene and hit F11, and with this emissive you can see that everything begins to glow. So let's open up our material instance and let's go down to emissive, and what we can do is we can turn this down and we can start to turn it up. Alright, But right now it doesn't really look like a light, it just looks like it's not shaded very well, and it's kind of confusing as to what's happening here. And that's because we can't really control the intensity yet. Okay, so in order to control the intensity, let's go back into our material. We have our color. What we want to do is we want to multiply this by a power. Okay, so let's introduce a multiply node holding M on the keyboard. And here's one of those prime examples where we could go all the way up here and start to drag these lines around, or we could just stay right where we're at, hold control on the keyboard and move this over. Alright, so we'll plug this into slot A. Okay. And let's go ahead and introduce a scalar parameter, and we'll call this emissive power. Okay. Oops. Give this a default value of 1 so that we're multiplying by 1. And in the description box we will just type in emissive power. Alright, and some of this is a little bit redundant, but for the sake of learning I think it's good to have descriptions on everything right now. And we'll go ahead and plug this in, and we'll make sure to group it underneath our emissive. And we'll apply this. Okay, so going back over, we now have emissive power. And we can turn this up, and what we see is that we're really getting some really hard lighting effects. And because there's a really bright blue kind of background, it's kind of hard to tell, so we'll look inside the material instance, and this is easier to see. So if we turn this to black, we can see we're not getting any value, and we can start to turn it up and maybe to blue. Alright, and so now that we have our color selected, we can come over here to our power and we can begin to multiply that up. Alright, so that's a really cool effect. So the next step is to, well, we could add our desaturation like we did on our albedo, and that's fairly simple. But we want to be able to mask it out. We want to be able to tell it that, you know, we don't want our whole mesh to be lit. So, for example, let's say we were making a street lamp and we only wanted the light bulb itself to be lit. Well, we could make an entire separate material for it, or we could just leave it in this material and use a mask to control that. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to go back to our material instance, our material editor, sorry, and we'll go ahead and add that desaturation first. So we'll right click, start to type in desaturation. We'll plug that in and plug that back into A. We will duplicate our scalar parameter, and this will be emissive saturation. Alright, and we'll put that in the description box as well. Saturation. Alright, and this will be a default value of 0, so we don't want it to be desaturated. Alright, so we have that set up and we can go ahead and apply that. So if we come in here now, we should be able to just desaturate this and start to get a you know, kind of a more faint blue. So it can be really handy, you know, say you're doing planet Earth and you just wanted that haze. So one way to get that, and it's cheap, so it doesn't hurt. Okay, so the mask. Let's go ahead and pull in another texture, and what we're going to do is, we know that multiplying anything by a value of 1 is itself, right? We take 10, we multiply it by 1, we get 10. Multiplying by 0, we get 0. We take 10, we multiply by 0, obviously we get 0. Alright, so with that in mind, our mask is going to be a black and white texture. And all of the black will represent 0, and all of the white will represent 1. So anything multiplied by that white will obviously give us the true value, and anything multiplied by 0 will cancel it out. Anything in between will give us a mixed value. So let's go in here and let's grab a black and white texture. Let's say something fairly obvious, kind of clear cut. And I'm not really seeing anything in here, so now might be a good time to go ahead and introduce importing textures. So we'll pull up Photoshop and we'll make a mask really quick. So we'll go File, New, and it doesn't need to be anything large. We'll just stick with 512. Alright, and we'll go ahead and fill the background in with black. Alright, and we need all the way black. Alright, we'll create a new layer, and where we want it to be lit, we're just gonna fill in with white. So what we'll do is we'll just draw a couple of circles here, and we'll fill that in with white. and we'll save as, and we'll save with Targa. And what I'll do is I will just save it to my desktop for now. We'll call this emissive underscore mask, and we're going to save it as a Targa file, and we will hit save. All right, 24 is fine, and minimize. Now to get that in here, we'll go up to our folder. This is really simple. We just go to our desktop, we grab our emissive mask, and we simply drag and drop it in there. That's all you have to do. All right. And now what we can do is we can select that emissive mask, and we'll come in here, and we will, all right, autosave. Now we can type in 2D, 2D, hit texture sample parameter, and it's going to pull that in. We'll title this emissive mask. We want this to be grouped underneath the emissive, and we can just emissive, mask. Oh geez, if I could get this right. Emissive mask shows where to use light, something like that. All right, now how do we get this to affect this? Well, it's easy. We just multiply it again. All right, so we'll create a new multiply node holding M, hold Control on the keyboard to relocate that, and let's now multiply right here by that. And now what we can see is that the white areas in our multiply are picking up the emissive and the black are not. So we'll go ahead and apply that. We'll go into our scene, F11, and now we're getting this really interesting result where we only have the emissive coming through in those given areas, excuse me. All right, and we can turn that up. And so this is some really cool effects. And we could even add some UV channel information a little bit later on so that we can kind of tile and maybe even animate this. But so far what we have is the ability to come in here and use the emissive. We can use an albedo. We have metalness, or we could simply use a metalness value. We have roughness or a roughness value. And the only thing that we're really missing, and we can use our normal intensity. The only thing we're really missing right now, let's go ahead and comment box this, call this emissive, is the ability to tell whether or not it has an emissive. Alright. And the best way to do this in our case is we could go set up a static switch. But the best way is just to set the value default to black. Or rather, we could even leave it at white, and we'll just set the emissive power to 0. And that way we're not getting any emissive off the bat. So if we come back and we apply that, and we go to our emissive, and we reset our emissive power to default, you can see that by default it will now be off. So if someone wants to use it, all they have to do is come into emissive and start to turn the power up. Alright, so that's really convenient, and it saves us on instruction count, which is always nice. So fairly simple tutorial series on how to get the basic stuff set up. In the next series, we're going to talk about kind of elaborating on some of this stuff and how to do some blend maps and some vertex painting. We'll get into some water puddle shading and some interesting tricks on how to do moss on brick walls and pill paint and things like that. But for now, we're going to call this a wrap. So this is the basic intro and get a material set up, and I hope this is useful to you. Thanks for watching. Welcome back to the 5th and final video of this tutorial series for the Master Material for Beginners. And this is kind of a bonus video on the ambient occlusion base setup. I had mentioned in prior videos that I was going to touch base on this, and I did not. So in this one, we're going to talk about setting up ambient occlusion. The engine default, as it wants to use it, in the indirect lighting, it will provide some extra AO. But we're also going to take it a step further and create some custom math that allows us to use some linear interpolation to kind of overlay it on top of our albedo and give really precise control over the highlights and lowlights to help kind of simulate that extra AO, if need be, even indirect daylight. So again, this is the final video. Please stay tuned for the next series. It's going to be Unreal 4 Tutorial Intermediate Master Materials. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Alright, so we're back again with a little bit of bonus content, because I did say that we're going to talk about the AO, and we didn't touch base on that. And while it can be minor, it could also contribute. in a big way on some meshes. And so there's a couple of ways we want to use the AO. There's the engine default, which uses AO in indirect lighting to kind of help simulate ambient occlusion on top of the screen space. And then there's the method that I use a lot, which is to multiply it on top of our albedo and give ourselves a what's called a LERP, a linear interpolation that allows us to control the white and black balance values. And so let's go ahead and get started with that by plugging in an ambient occlusion map and seeing what it does. Okay, so to do that we need to go over here to the content browser and we need to find something that will work for our ambient occlusion map. Okay, and we want this to be fairly clear, so we will, as a matter of fact, what we'll do is we'll go ahead and pick the texture that we imported. So we'll use this emissive mask as the ambient occlusion. Alright, so we'll right click and type in 2D to pull up that, and we'll just call this AO. Alright, we're getting the autosave there, so that didn't go over well when I hit enter. Alright, AO, we'll title it. And we'll put this under the group AO. Okay. And we'll come down here under the description and just title it AO. Okay. So let's go ahead and plug this in. Let's apply. And let's go into the engine. We'll hit F11. And what we need to do is we need to go to our material instance and let's turn this emissive power back off. Okay. And so what we can see is that everywhere where this texture was black, it's reading some extra ambient occlusion. And everywhere where it's white, it reads none. Okay, so when we look at this object in direct light, we're not really seeing much happen at all. And that's because it's entirely lit, and therefore there isn't much occlusion happening. Or at least not that the engine's not already taken care of. We can see it a little bit. When we roll around the back into the indirect lighting, it becomes quite apparent. Okay, so for example, if we were, making something that had a lot of crevices and whatnot, when we looked at the sunlight, it would be fairly lit. When we looked at it back here, we would see the dark and the crevices from baking out an AO or whatnot. Okay, but there's an extra use that we can get out of this, some extra mileage, and that's by adding it on top of our albedo. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go ahead and change this texture. Okay, go into our material instance, and let's just grab the this right here will work just fine. So if we double click on it, we can see that the stones are lit a little bit and everything else is kind of black, and that's going to work just fine. So we'll go ahead and pull this, and that's given us a little bit better simulated AO. So now we can actually see the stones getting darker in there and whatnot. Okay, so let's go back into our material and let's talk about a different way to use it. Alright, so we'll go ahead and drag this way down here. Let's settle here. What we could do is we could multiply this on top of our albedo. Alright, and what I mean by that is let's hit Control W and duplicate it. Oops, let's grab it and let's just scroll up here and make some room for ourselves inside of our albedo comment box. Okay, and what we can do is we can begin to multiply this on top of there, but we don't want it to happen by default. We want it to happen with a switch. So let's go ahead and take a switch, static switch parameter, and let's say has AO albedo overlay. Alright, so if this is false, then we just want to plug in our normal and before we do that, let's go ahead and move that right over there. If it's false, then we just want to plug in our normal maps. Right, nothing changed. So all we did was we added an extra link. We didn't actually change anything. Let's give ourselves some room. If it's true, however, then we want to run this simulation, but we want to multiply this with it. Alright, so let's go ahead and hit M on the keyboard, and let's drag this in here and drag this in there. And something to note real quick is that you can only have one input. So if I were to drag this down to false, you see it replaces the input. I can drag this back. But you can have multiple outputs. So I can just keep dragging this out and plugging it into multiple inputs. So this can actually feed into false, and it can also feed into this chain of events that will read true. Alright, so if true, then take all this and multiply it by the AO. Okay, now let's apply that and let's see what that does. Alright, so we'll go into our instance and we'll go into the base. Actually, what we want to do is we didn't tell this thing where to live, so let's go over here and let's assign this to the albedo. Okay, so now we go to our material instance. When we go to albedo, we have this has AO albedo overlay, and let's just turn that on. Let's see what's happening. Okay, so we can see what's happening right now is that it's taking this and it's multiplying it on top of it. So all those black pixels are getting multiplied to a darker value, and all the whiter pixels are getting multiplied by near their same value. So if I toggle this off and on, you can see the difference it makes. So it's giving us some extra depth over here, even in the lighting. So we're basically using the AO and we're cheating it, right? And we're just applying it everywhere if we want to. But I'm not satisfied with the results, so I want to be able to control how much the white values and the black values are affecting my albedo. So there's actually a different piece of math we can use rather than a multiply. So I'll go ahead and delete this, and it's called a linear interpolate. So if we hold L on the keyboard, this is the new node, we haven't talked about this. Basically what it's going to do, it's going to try to linearly interpolate between this map and the others via an alpha. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to use this map as the alpha. Okay, we're going to plug that into the alpha, and we're also going to use the A and the B as some scalar parameters. So we'll go ahead and drop 2 in the scene, or rather we'll just drop 1 and we'll duplicate it when we're done. So this is going to be AO white's power. Alright, and this will go under the albedo, and we'll say controls AO overlay white's power. Alright, and we'll duplicate this, and this one's just going to be for black. Alright, we'll plug this into A and B. Okay, and we want the default value on both of these to be 1 and 1. Okay, so now that we have that plugged up, let's take a second to look at what we're doing. We have a mask, and we're saying to draw a lerp between the two, and we're telling it what powers they should be in. Okay, so we're saying and as a matter of fact, before we go any further, let me just tell you that these need to be reversed. It would seem that the main power would be on the top, but it's actually on the bottom. We're saying draw the value of white at 1, draw it fully, and a value of black at 1, draw it fully, according to this map. So all these values are going to stay the same. And what's going to happen is, as we start to crunch this white down, it's going to pull these white values down. As we begin to crunch these, it's going to do the same. So it's kind of like adjusting the levels. And that's what we've got here. And one more thing worth noting is, you can't actually plug in a 3-channel map into the alpha. What we need to do is just grab one of these channels, say for example the R channel. If we did not, we would actually get an error. And that's because it's reading it as a black and white value is what it's doing. Alright, so we'll move this out of the way, and now if true, we want to multiply all of this together. Right? There we go. So now when we true, we're adding this math to the albedo, and let's just make sure that all this is inside of the albedo. We'll go ahead and apply this, and we'll go over to our material instance. Alright, so when we turn the albedo overlay off and on, what we can see now is that we're not really seeing much of a result. And that's because we're multiplying, we're kind of lerping between a value of 1 and 1 right now. So if we wanted our blacks to be true black like they are in the mask, we would set that to 0, which is the value of black. And our whites to be true white. Okay. So now when I turn it off, you can see that we're getting the result we were getting earlier. Alright. So now what we have the ability to do, and the point of all that is, if this is too much black, I can just start to tone this back up towards 1, and I can begin to get a really subtle difference. Right? So you can just barely see it happening now. And even furthermore, I could take the whites down if I wanted to, or I could bring them up, kind of pump them out like that. And this is just a small levels adjustment, and obviously it's optional. And to be completely honest, it's not something I use all the time, but it does come in handy when you're doing stuff that has age and you kind of want it to look like there's some extra grime in there without having to go through extensive work. You can preview that in the engine. And of course, this is stuff that will all be housed in your albedo and your roughness as well, but it's just that extra percent to go just a little bit farther with it and take it to the next level. But there's a little bonus video for you. Again, you can just turn this off and use the AO as the regular, and what we'll do finally, just to cap this all off, is we'll just tell the engine whether or not we even have an AO. So what we need to do is, in order to do that, we need to have another static switch down here. So we'll right click, go to static switch parameter, and say has AO, and we will put this inside of the base. Alright, and we'll move this line over here. Alright, and if it's true, and we'll say has AO, and we'll put in parentheses engine default, just so we know which AO we're talking about. We're talking about the actual ambient occlusion. And if it's false, well then we'll just put a parameter. We don't need it to be scalar because we're not going to change it, of in there, and we'll plug that into there, and we'll make it 1, which means it's going to be a value of white, which is essentially is having no extra AO. So we'll go ahead and apply those changes. What we'll do is we'll go in albedo and we'll turn off the overlay so we can see what we're doing, and we'll scroll down to the base, and we'll say has AO. Alright, and so if we scroll down to the back, because this is the engine default AO, which is only based in indirect lighting, and we toggle this off and on, you can see the result that we get. So over here, we're not getting too much across the board, but when we look at it in the indirect lighting, we get some nice effects. Right. Okay, so we'll go ahead and hit F11, bring everything back, we'll save all, and that concludes the bonus video. Go ahead and comment this, call it AO, move everything down, and hope to see you guys in the next video where we'll go over some more complex methods like I discussed at the end of the last part, and we'll do some blending and some vertex painting. Hope you guys enjoy. Thanks for watching.